Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin. Hi.
In the last few videos, we've mentioned that people have an unreliable sense of feeling, that their sensory appreciation is inaccurate. So let's talk about what is sensory appreciation, why and how has it gone wrong for most people, and how do we re-educate our sensory appreciation, and what does this even mean in practice?
Yes, it's a very important topic, and to talk about it, it may be necessary first of all to take a bigger view as to what is the situation nowadays, and especially related to the Alexander technique, because of course we teach a form of Alexander technique that is not the dominant system of teaching. We teach without hands, we teach long distance, and this is very different from what is happening nowadays when people are having lessons of the modern, what I call the modern Alexander technique, to differentiate about the system that we use. So historically, since the 90s, there has been a criticism, like a wave, and people ride waves, as you know, a wave of criticism of what has been called dis-embodiment. Because dis-embodiment was like a very general idea of neglecting the body as a source of knowledge. There was this criticism that scientists and intellectuals were all in the mind, and they were viewing the mind as superior to the body. Well, that's easy to say what people are thinking when you place ideas into their mouths, into their mind. It's not what they are saying themselves, but nevertheless, that's how the wave started, with this idea of a criticism of the separation from the mind and body, which is that people that were in the mind were criticized for the separation. Nobody thought that there could be a balance between the two. And so nobody imagined that the trend toward this word that everybody's talking about today. If you want to be trendy, you have to, in fact, inject in your conversation words like body knowledge or bodily knowledge, corporeal knowledge. You will hear also things like that are a bit more, even more trendy, if you want. It's embodied knowledge or embodied cognition. Most people will really react to these words, especially if they are in the somatic world, because it's also called somatic knowledge. For example, dancers, singers, people that are, in fact, that have maybe academic grades, but not in the scientific domain. These people will react very well. Women's studies and things like that, opening yourself to feelings in the very broad sense of not only what you feel, mechanical feelings that you can get through your body, but also emotions, connection with the earth, connection with the animals part that is in you, all that sorts of language. And now, when we come back to the Alexander technique world, it is clear that Alexander is talking of, he's also criticizing separation. And of course, at first glance, there was a connection between the new train, the new wave, and the Alexander technique. And because teachers are using their hands and communicating a feeling of what is right, well, the connection was evident. So there are many, many teachers that are into promoting this idea that we are reconciling people with their body knowledge. It is important to understand the definition that is given to embodied knowledge because it will help us to understand that the initial Alexander technique, or if you want, what I call the conscious guidance and control education, is a disembodiment technique. It has nothing to do with that new trend. What a shame. Because, of course, if you just write a paper where you can place somatic knowledge or embodied cognition somewhere, you get fantastic response from the crowd. Yes, but we are not after getting response from the crowd. We are about teaching a very, very interesting technique. And it's very interesting not because it's trendy, it's interesting because, of course, it enables people to get a form of conscious guidance and control of their own movements and gestures. So that is completely different. So embodied knowledge is defined as an intuitive process. It's coming from the body. It's something that is based on physical sensation and, of course, increased bodily awareness. So that means that people will be taught embodied knowledge. We are not told, embodied knowledge is not as I thought it was at first, and the criticism is very simple, would have been very simple, like a knowledge that is that you have to dig for deep down into your body. The promoters of the somatic trend, they all accept the idea that you can improve your embodied knowledge, that when you start, your embodied knowledge is no. That means that the child before one doesn't know how to sit, doesn't know how to walk when any vertebrate animal can. So it's necessary to understand that embodied knowledge is something you can improve, and you improve it with what they call increased bodily awareness. Increased bodily awareness is a form of concentration of your mental capacities on the body. And for us, it means on the body feelings. That's where there is the gap. That's where we cannot say that conscious guidance and control is embodied cognition. It is not. And that's what I'm going to try and explain. First of all, sensory appreciation for us is faulty. It's faulty to find out solutions to new problems. So it's better to start and view things with examples. So I am going to, first of all, share a screen. If I can find it. So you should see a screen that says the initial Alexander technique is a disembodiment technique. Is that what you see? Yes? Good. Yes, it's a strong statement. Nearly 2/3 of the viewers are going to stop listening to that video because of that statement. Yes, it's also a way to select people. You have to want to understand things. You cannot accept ideas on the face of their high score in, for example, Google search. Of course, if you look for a disembodiment technique on Google search, you're not going to find many. So what is Alexander saying? Alexander, first of all, is taking an indirect route, as often. The aim of re-education on a general basis is to bring about, at all time and for all purposes, not a series of correct positions of postures, but a coordinated use of the mechanisms in general. Let's stop a second. We are talking about a reeducation. And when we say reeducation, we don't mean reeducation of the body. We say reeducation of our habits of mind. The first habit of mind is when we have to deal with what we call a psychomechanical problem. I will explain. A psychomechanical problem, for example, would be how to sit with the maximum efficiency. It's a psychomechanical problem. This expression is used by Alexander to say that any way you sit, there is a conception. There is an intellectual, mental concept that you have of what it is to sit and rest. And you just look around yourself, around you, and you see people sitting, and you will find that they are looking for something, and they are reacting not only according to the physical situation, but they are reacting according to their ideas. For example, there is this idea that in sitting, you should feel well. You shouldn't feel any pain. You should feel the rest. Rest is a word that has an embodied cognition definition. It's a feeling, really. Yes? And that is, of course, off the mind. It's not off the body. You're thinking these things. And this habit of basing definitions on a feeling is what we aim to reeducate first of all. So we are not to bring about a series of correct position or postures, but a coordinated use of the mechanism in general. So a coordinated use of the mechanism in general. The use is a guidance that you have in mind, and that you are, it's like a plan, it's like a strategy that you are going to use, to employ in order to obtain the aim of sitting, for example. And so when we say we are not to obtain or to bring about in our pupils a series of correct position of postures, what we mean is we want them to have a correct idea about what is rest in sitting, what is efficient in sitting. And this is not the feeling of being at rest or the feeling of being efficient, the feeling of equality. No, no, no. It's not that. We have a principle that we call the principle of the means whereby, and the idea is to analyze the different movements of the different parts of the anatomical structure when the person is sitting, and to, in fact, command the different movements of the parts in a new way. That is what Alexander called a coordinated use of the mechanism in general. So we need to stop a second, because for most people, there is a neat divide between, on one side, position, and on the other side, a coordinated series of movements. You can imagine movements, for example, in people walking downstairs, or running, or making push-ups. But when you think of somebody standing or sitting, what movements are we talking about? This is where it is important to, in fact, go beyond the first elementary understanding of what Alexander is saying. Alexander is using the picture of a sergeant, and he shows that that sergeant hasn't got an efficient position in standing. Of course, is he not contradicting himself? We are not touching correct positions. So where is it? Where is the coordinate use of the mechanism in general? Well, is that for Alexander, that surgeon has assumed that position. That position is only an instantaneous frozen image of a movement, or what we call a gesture. A gesture is, in fact, not a facial habit. We call gesture the organized movements of the whole structure, so that it presents, when frozen, it presents a certain geometry. So for the surgeon to assume his posture of standing, he had to move the different bony spots of the structure into place. We are interested in these movements. So imagine that a person comes to me and wants a lesson, and for the first lesson, I ask the person to stand sideways to the camera, and I observe that the person has that type of gesture. Of course, that person has a conception. He's not doing this like a natural reaction. No, no, no. It's all part of a system of, well, after repeating that gesture sufficiently, he has now a feeling that he's doing good to himself. That's the problem with sensory appreciation. We said sensory appreciation is faulty or untrustworthy. Well, the reason why it's untrustworthy is that if you repeat that kind of posture you see on the left, well, after a while, it's going to feel right. And that feeling of right, that feeling of rest, has nothing to do with the mechanical functioning of the structure. We see very clearly the faulty poise of the thorax, where the breathing should happen. We see that, well, the spine is certainly not performing its function of support. We see that the structure is not balanced, yes, on the field of gravity, so the person has to resist forces here. That cannot be rest. Okay. And so we cannot trust feelings. Feelings are, in fact, a picture of our habitual use of the system. If you repeat a gesture time and time again, very quickly, it will feel right. And if you try to change it and make it different, any change you produce is not going to feel right. The reason for that is that, for example, the elastic mechanism of the back are very shortened. And as you know, when you shorten an elastic, it produces no force. But also, in the case of biomechanical elastics or springs, they waste. The less you use them, the less you stretch them, the less you lengthen them, well, the less they can produce elastic resistance. So after a while, you may have to adapt and convince yourself to practice a reeducation program which is not going to feel good, and which at first is not going to produce instant results. That's another problem with sensory appreciation is, am I feeling good now? Is a habit of mine that has to be re-educated in that case. Because if the answer is no, then you will tend to think that the re-education program you're following is not good, of course. So that is the first thing. The second we see here is that when the person has a conception or an embodied cognition of a certain gesture, like here it's standing, but it doesn't mean that embodied knowledge is correct. it does not mean that embodied knowledge is really thoroughly sought out. Of course not, because as you remember, it's about this intuitive bodily knowledge that you get at performing action. Well, this picture is like a criticism of that idea, because the embodied knowledge that that person has developed is clearly faulty. So in Alexander's thinking, there is a conception associated with any form of physical activity that we can have, but some are faulty. He called them misconception or faulty conception. The question is, if you develop that capacity of attention toward your feeling, what is going to help you to, in fact, debunk these faulty conceptions? If the conception is based on feeling and you're trying with feeling to, in fact, analyze it, you're stuck. It's as simple. So we get into the idea that Alexander developed of a disembodiment technique, a technique of conscious guidance. And the technique of conscious guidance, of course, has what we call criteria, or as a whole, a criterion of what is efficient, a criterion of what is the correct use of the mechanism in general. And so when you analyze two different frozen moments of a gesture, you would say two positions. Well, you will see that the two positions are very, very different. And there is a major difference in the conception of the different movements. Well, the difference is that we are following a criterion. At first, we say that that criterion is correct. We say that because you cannot feel that it is correct. If your habit of sitting is to sit with props, to sit with the back of the chair, to sit with the hands placed on the table, or with the finger crossed on your lap all the time, because that's how you feel, right? Well, we have a very different criterion. The criterion we have is reasoned. So we analyze the anatomical structure. There are different bony spots on the frontal parts of the torso. And we have this geometrical idea of, for example, here on the side, aligning the different spots, well, on a vertical plane. Of course, here, this is shown because they are rulers of the same length against the vertical plane of reference, so that we are absolutely certain that these spots are on the same plane. And we observe then a very peculiar shape of the torso. So when we talk about conscious guidance and control, we talk about conscious guidance and control of the mechanism of the torso. So this is an expression of a new gesture, and that gesture is not based on feeling. It's not based on an intuitive feeling of what is right. Remember that Alexander was alone when he started to invent his technique. He knew he was wrong. He had, in fact, organic problems, or what you call functional problems with his speech. He knew he was wrong, but we know that he changed his use. And we know that as a result of his change of use, when he's seen working with a pupil, here there is a part of the photograph that is missing. This elderly gentleman is in fact placing his hands on a person. Well, I am not very interested in what he's doing to the other person. I'm very interested in what he's doing to himself. because it's absolutely obvious when you watch Alexander moving that his gestures are planned in advance. He's not doing anything intuitively. He's really ordering the different movements of the different parts of the torso. And this is the only way to get what we see here as the noble pose, or in the Alexander technique, we call the position of mechanical advantage. And it's not a position as such as a fixed system. It's a transitory position that is, in fact, perfect mobility and stable equilibrium. So these concepts are intellectual, they are scientific, they are not any form of embodied cognition. Alexander did not go into his feelings and deep down or through different exercise found which was the exercise that was giving him the best feeling. It is absolutely not that. It's like the idea of disassociating different movements that are, in fact, producing certain shortening, certain misorganization of the parts, and replacing them by a process of guidance. So you decide what it is you want for these different movements, and then control, then you check that you're really doing what you say you're doing. So this process, of course, is always contrary to what you feel. It's contrary first to the habit of mind of dealing with what you feel, as if because we are talking about a movement in space of the whole structure, I should feel something special. No, there is nothing special to feel when you produce that type of organizations of movements, but there is something special to think. That's something that Alexander was very clear about. So let's read just for a second an idea that comes from that. Those who are fortunate or unfortunate enough to undertake to act as teacher are well aware of the difficulty of finding an adult who can, as we say, think of more than one thing at a time or perform satisfactorily any evolution requiring the coordinated use of even two parts of the organism. Coordinated use of the different parts during any evolution calls for the continuous, conscious projections of orders to the different parts involved. The primary order concerned with the guidance and control of the primary part of the act being continued, whilst the orders connected with the secondary part of the movement are projected, and so on. However many orders are required. The number of these depending upon the demands of the processes concerned with a particular movement. So this is a very important statement, and it will show how much we are talking about the mind and not about the intuitive sensory processes of the body that can augment our knowledge. Here, we are clearly talking about performing action that require a coordinated use of many parts of the system. The coordinated use of many parts of the system has to be guided with different orders. You cannot feel a number of parts moving at the same time. Okay, you can dream that you do, but when it is time to make an experiment of conscious guidance, and you ask a teacher to direct the middle, upper part, lower part of the torso, as well as the arms, for example, and you define clear criteria for the movement. Clear criteria in special terms, in geometry, saying when I look at that person, for example, I can see that the rib in the front of the torso is very far forward. And I can see, for example, that the throat, the top of the torso, the frontal part of the torso is very far back. I would like to observe a situation when the person is concerting the movement so that the three spots are brought to the same plane. We can, in fact, create orders of movements. And we can, in fact, also create, for example, an idea of speed, because if you want to align all these three spots, for example, on the front of the ankle, well, you have to understand that the speed of the throat has to be much less than the speed of the center torso, because otherwise, well, if they have the same speed, there is no way you can align them all on the same line. So you will define the time and the space, the geometry and the speeds of the movement, and you ask the person to think of all these things at once. If the habit of the person has been somatic cognition, trying to immerse oneself into, well, the feeling, the quality of the feeling, well, there is no way that the person is going to be able to employ memory. Well, because memory is absolutely necessary. You have to remember which spot has to have which speed. You have to remember where you want to, what it is you want to obtain. And what you want to obtain is not a feeling of the position, of the new position. No, no, no. You don't want a feeling of the new position, because there is a problem with the feeling of the new position. Is that at first, if you come for your first lesson with a habit of gesture that is such of the sergeant, well, at first, the first time you're going to align and organize the movements of the parts of the torso to obtain something coming near to this realization, well, you will feel horrendous. It will be so different. It will ask so many muscles to come into play. It will feel awful. We teach people how to feel awful and continue to perform instructions, which is completely crazy for somebody that is on the train, on the wave of the embodied cognition strategy. Yes, it's absolutely it's mental. It's not possible. They can't accept it unless they start to understand that there is an interest in directing the mind in this way. Because the problem here is not that we want the mind to have to be over the body. No, it's not. The idea is here to start to become capable of directing the mind. Of, for example, I decide I am going to think about 3 or 4 things at once, and I will. Because when we practice experiment, the first thing we discover is that when we decide that we are going to organize 3 or 4 movements at a time, well, the net result is we are not. At first, we cannot direct our mind. The idea of conscious guidance and control, of course, we use, like a somatic teacher, we use a sphere of activity that you could call bodily action. Of course, yes, we do. Yes, but the purpose is not there. The purpose is the development of the mind, is how to memorize things, how to in fact, exactly as Alexander is saying, how to continue, for example, an order of movement of one part while we order the movement of another part, which means how do we think of many things at once to perform satisfactorily an evolution that requires the coordinated use of two parts. You have to continually think of these two parts while you're making the adjustment. If you forget one, you will control immediately on viewing your video, well, that you've stopped the first movement when you said you didn't want to do that. So a disembodiment technique is not about position. It's about coordination of different parts at the same time. Well, Alexander has made things very difficult for us because he's talking about coordinated use of parts. And this is impossible. This is an impossibility. We cannot coordinate parts. We can only coordinate movements. And that has made a tremendous problem. Let me explain. For example, here you see the same idea, and most teachers of the modern Alexander technique, of the somatic idea of developing that bodily cognition, that bodily knowledge, when they see this image, they cannot react differently than to think that we are talking about a fixed position. Because the torso here is clearly supported, propped, fixed by rulers against a vertical wall. So they can only see what their preconception of the separation between postures and positions will lead them to. For example, here we see a procedure, and in this procedure, yes, there are props that are making sure so that the student knows that the throat, the top bony parts of the torso, the top of the sternum, and the middle ribs at the front are exactly aligned vertically on top of each other. Yes? Okay, they are props. But there is something else in this gesture that is quite interesting. Is that what you see here is that the student is stomping his feet on the floor. The feet are not touching the floor because this student is really lifting his legs, both legs at the same time, very fast in the air. Yes, and then bringing them back down very fast also in order to produce a stomping sound. So in this picture, I hope I can explain what we mean by gesture, because you have to understand here that the legs are not, in fact, supporting the torso at all. Torso is simply supporting the legs. Torso is powering the movement of the legs. It's the conscious use of the torso that allows the student here to, in fact, lift the legs, which is a massive postural perturbation, without the torso seeming to be affected. So you have to understand that for this to be possible, well, there is a movement at the throat, right? At that right moment, there is a movement so that the throat is not projected backward in order to power the movement of the lift of the feet and in the air. So if there is a movement of the throat projected forward, there must also be a movement at least of the lower part of the torso not going forward at the same time. It's clearly seen that if the throat goes forward, then the lower part of the torso must be directed back at the same time by the student. And that explains why it is then possible to see a person sitting with an upright torso, what Alexander called the position of mechanical advantage, or the noble pose for Delsart. We can see that the person is developing a capacity where is able to disassociate the movement of the legs from the movement of the torso. That is, it's capable of, in fact, powering the movement of the legs with the torso. So the torso is the tree, and the legs and arms, we will see later, are the limbs. It's a sentence that Alexander was very keen on using. And this is absolutely counterintuitive. Now, when I will show you the photo or the film of the same student, well, performing the same procedures without rulers, you will see that it's possible to change our conception that positions are fixed, that positions are different from gestures, different from series of movements performed together. Because in this case, when the rulers are taken off, well, the torso is still vertical upon the chair, the arms are alongside the body, and the feet and the legs are still going up and down in the air very fast without affecting the movement of the torso. So that means that when organizing the different parts of the torso according to a purely intellectual criterion, there is no feeling associated with that. Well, it's possible then to discover a new way of organizing the gesture that provides, well, immense benefit in terms of capacity of movement and also in terms of, well, functioning. Because breathing, digestion is not affected by the way the person is sitting, and the movement of the person, Alexander has a definition, he calls it perfect mobility. Perfect mobility is not the possibility of any sort of movement. Perfect mobility is the capacity to move any, well, peripheral part without affecting the expansion of the torso, where everything is going on, the breathing, the circulation, the digestion. And when you start this, it feels first impossible. This attitude of the torso while the legs are going up and down in the air is just totally, well, we say impossible, as Alexander said, impossible, and we say counterintuitive, because it's only impossible for the feeling side of our mind. We do, when we make a separation between mind and body, it's very funny, because in fact, from the person point of view, there is no separation between mind and body when you start using a criterion. It's just that you decide that you're going to use your mind in a slightly different way as your habit. Your habit is always to use the mind to feel how you could do something. Well, here, we just decide to use the mind a slightly different way by thinking, okay, I am going to learn how to analyze the different parts of the mechanism. And through what I understand, I am also going to learn how I can command or order the movements of the different parts at the same time, everything going on at the same time. And so we are not making a separation between the mind and the body. We are just making a separation between two different uses of the mind. There's what we call the subconscious use of the mind, embodied cognition, and there is a conscious use of the mind. That is, we are going to, in fact, instead of concentrate the mind on the body, we are going to start and use memory more, use verbal instructions. There is something that is missed most of the time by the modern Alexander technique, is that they have a fixed litany, a fixed sentence that they think is what Alexander called the orders. That's let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen. Well, in the initial Alexander technique, we absolutely do not use these orders as, in fact, definite orders of performance. These are definite orders of inhibition. What we do not want to think about or to try and do is to have the neck free, have the head forward and up, have the back lengthened and widen, because these are the results. And if you think about the result, you don't think about the means whereby. And the means whereby are not a certain capacity of inhibition or direction. No, the means whereby are the orders of movement that you can assign, attribute to different bony parts of the structure. So we are teaching in the initial Alexander technique a reason technique based on criterion, principles, rules, and orders, which has nothing to do with the embodied cognition somatic practices. Nothing. So we are not an embodiment technique. We are a disembodiment technique. We don't, when we talk about reeducation of sensory appreciation, what we mean by that is that, because we are talking about reeducation of sensory appreciation like the modern Alexander technique, but our meaning is completely different. Our meaning is that we should not trust our sensory appreciation. Of course, after a few months of working at lengthening and widening the back, at the conscious direction of the mechanism of the torso, so that you can sit for hours with these movements acting for you, for perfect mobility, for elastic response, well, it starts to feel right. I cannot deny it. I've never had a back problem in the last 20 years. Yes. But do I trust in this bodily knowledge that has been acquired through a disembodiment technique? No, I do not need to, and I do not want to, because I discovered that there is no end to the process of the disembodiment learning. And it's always possible. Of course, with rulers, you don't see it, but if I was to show you a picture of the same student without the rulers, you would see slight problems and discrepancies between what is produced, the performance, and the model. So there is still work to do, even after working for 20 years in this, because in fact here I tried to hide, well, the face of the student, but I forgot to hide it here. And you may discover that, in fact, I am the student. Okay, so I can talk and be very harsh with him, no problem, or gentle, doesn't matter. And I can say that here the conditions or criteria of the position of mechanical advantage is very, very near what Alexander was showing. But when I do perform the same procedure of stamping, the stamping procedure, we call it, which is without the rulers, I still can see defects, mechanical defects in the performance of the series of movements that are making that gesture possible. And it's not a question of self-pity or self-criticism. No, it's very interesting. It's just to say, wow, next time I am going to perform the same procedure, which is every single day because I'm sitting, and at the moment, because of my microphone, you can't hear it, but I am tapping like mad with my feet on the floor. I will, well, integrate into my direction of the mind so that I can direct the gesture slightly differently. Because there is not one set of orders that are perfect and that you need to learn. And once you learn them, that's fine. No. We, in a disembodiment technique, of course, we are not teaching positions, but we are not teaching either a set of clear, definite orders of movements. No. We are teaching a technique of experiments, a technique of discovery, a technique of trying to refine, trying to ask questions, trying to, in fact, change. Well, yes, it's a technique of change. Is that clear?
Yes. So someone in the modern Alexander technique who's watching this might reply that when they give orders, they're orders of inhibition. So you mentioned the neck, the head, and the back. That if they give these orders of inhibition, the correct use of the mechanism of the torso and the whole body will just appear. So they're stopping the wrong movements, and then the correct movements will just appear. But that's not what you're saying at all. Can you talk about what is actually happening instead in your work?
Well, yes, it's not what is happening at all, because we say that, for example, lengthening the back, to lengthen and widen the back. This is one order that he used. So they have in mind that they want to lengthen and widen the back. And someday, especially if they receive enough, in fact, work, which means that somebody is helping them from outside to create this condition that we call lengthening and widening the back, they think that if they only repeat these words in their mind, well, they are going to appear. They are going to appear because, of course, there is this bodily knowledge that has been constructed by the fact that the gesture has been repeated many times. So with their manipulators, with their touch teacher, they will repeat same gesture many times. And so this gesture is going to be like incorporated, embodied, and it will just appear. Well, the person is going to feel that way. That's absolutely clear. I'm not denying that the person will feel much better, that the person will feel much more at ease. But if you use a video, a slow motion video, and you film that person that has had the lesson 2 minutes ago, and you film that person standing, walking, and going to sit without help, there are many problems that appear, that in fact it's not working. My only problem with the modern Alexander technique, because I was trained as a stat teacher. I trained 20 years ago or some to use my hands and to, in fact, promote in people these conditions. But the first problem I found is that it was not working for my pupils. And I could see them, in fact, return to their habitual use immediately. And what was really bothering me is that many times I saw the same event where just after a lesson, the person felt she still had it. She had for half an hour, for 1 hour. I've even heard people telling me for half a day, they kept going, that transformative feeling they had through the hands of the teacher. Wow, they were light, they were free for a long period of time. I've seen that happen in workshops. I've seen that happen everywhere. What is very funny is that I have filmed these events, because they happen quite often, and there are even films on the net, videos where you see a person having what we call a turn, a short lesson by a senior fantastic teacher that has great aura, that is produced socially because everybody thinks that that person is fantastic. So after the lesson, you will find that the pupil has a glow, as a, wow, yes, oh yes, fantastic. And you see the person moving. if you observe the geometry of the parts and you compare the feeling the person is having still with what she was just before the lesson, there is a problem. The person is still feeling the feeling of ease, the feeling of efficiency, when she's in fact doing exactly what she was doing before the lesson. So the feeling is not associated with the movements, with the coordination of the different parts. That feelings linger. That's a problem. Yeah, you understand why.
And another issue someone in the modern Alexander technique would have with your concept of disembodiment would be that they are we not meant to be working towards psychophysical unity? This sounds like it's a contradiction with psychophysical. Can you explain what the definition of psychophysical is in your work?
My God, we have been going on for a little bit more than 50 minutes now. And that is a question in itself. Let's give a very short answer and understand that this is a short answer. There is much more behind that.
We will go more into depth on what psychophysical means in another.
But just let's give a very short answer. Psychophysical unity means that anything you do, being trained or not trained, any action that you have is not a physical action. It's a physical action that has a basis of what you think is good, what you think is right, and what you think is possible. There is no action you can make that is purely intuitive as such. And psychophysical unity for Alexander means that there is a conception in everything you perform. And so if you don't perform according to rules, it's therefore that your conception has to be changed. So psychophysical unity is a disembodiment concept.
Okay.
I will go. That needs a long explanation. You can wait, and also I need to support what I'm saying with quotes from Alexander so that you can see it. But for the moment, yes, that's my view of psychophysical unity.
Okay. Well, excellent, Jeando. Let's stop there today, and we'll talk more about that in the next video. So for everybody listening and watching the video, if you check out the show notes underneath, you'll get links to Jeando's websites, and we will see you again next week. Thank you, Jeando.
Thank you, Kevin, and bye.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.